Hey everyone, welcome to Source, the Rethink Mining podcast. We're going to explore mining, its innovation, and transformation in the industry that's going to drive our world forward. I'm Carl, I'm your host, and the Executive Director and CEO of Rethink Mining. What we're going to do with this podcast is meet some really interesting people, talk about the industry, talk about innovations, talk about new technology, and explore what's actually possible and what we can do collectively to create the minerals and metals that are necessary to drive our world forward. I hope you join us. Yeah, so on podcast today, we're really fortunate to have Roby Stancel joining us. And if you don't know Roby, you should. So we're going to have a great conversation. He's been involved in mining, other industries, startups, VCs, et cetera. He's got a really, really interesting, cool background and coming to us from Germany via Joburg or something like that. So Roby, welcome today.
Well, thanks, Carl.
So, I've known Roby for about 10 years, and we're always talking about the mining industry, the state of the industry, what we need to do different, how to get there. So I'm kind of curious, Roby, if you can share with us your thoughts on where the mining industry is today and where we need to go. And then we can dive into other pieces of that.
Well, I could take the negative or the positive view. The negative view, let's start with that one, is it's not getting easier. The ore bodies are getting deeper, the grades are getting lower. Everyone wants to, avoid tailings, water, energy use, and so on. But fact of the matter is, if you have lower grades, you will have, for the same pound of metal, you're going to have more tailings. And therefore, business as usual won't work. With business as usual, you will have what? A 10% change and not a 3x or 10x change, and that is what's necessary. So that's the bad part. The good part is the craziness about energy transition, which moved mining basically front and center for everybody. Until now, nobody cared about mining. Now all of a sudden, everybody is wondering where the lithium and copper and nickel and cobalt and so on is coming from. And therefore, I guess for the first time, mining is in the driver's seat. So we get to decide who we give the metals to and who we don't give them to when it comes, for example, to ESG targets and things like that.
But is that also potentially a problem? Because if you take a look at what I'm looking at, the two sides of the coin, the negative part that it's things aren't moving fast enough. We've got to change the business, et cetera. At the same time, we've got to accelerate and create more materials. So is there a risk that somebody outside is going to come in and disrupt the mining and say, we can't wait anymore. We're gonna buy the mine and operate it, or whatever that looks like? Is there a risk of doing that, or you think somebody's maybe even thinking about that?
Well, depends on who you are in the mining house. If you say others are buying you out, if the, say, automotive OEMs go upstream, that's maybe good for the industry, not necessarily good for the individual miner. Let's put it that way. So there's certainly that dynamic going on. At the same time, there is the issue that, how should I say, everything is happening under the premise of environmental concerns and decarbonization. We're building a complete new industry. Well, building a new industry never was very environmentally friendly, and that's what we're doing exactly right now, because we're not, we're in mining, we're still keeping, the steel industry alive, all the base metals and so on. And in addition to that, we're mining all these other metals. Therefore, something's really got to give in order for that to really be environmentally friendly, because right now, electric vehicle, French government study basically says the EV today has 4 times the environmental impact of a regular diesel car. And that is all those additional new metals which are not mined in any different way from how we used to do it. So that has to change.
So and back to the original question about where we need to be, and that has to change. So the industry itself, how mining operates and does things, has to change, right? That's basically what you're saying. We can't lean on 5% efficiencies anymore. What do we need to do?
Well, the great philosopher Carl Weatherall always says innovation happens at the speed of trust, not at the speed of technology. So the stuff is there, and the way a mining house makes decisions, it's all a commercial question. It's not that the feasibility of a lot of new technologies isn't there, it's the viability. And in a way that is unfair to say that these new technologies are more expensive, because if we actually put that much money and effort into that and subsidies and all that as we do into incumbent technologies, they would very quickly get there, and then they would have the economy of scale that also makes it commercially interesting. Like hydrogen, for example, is viable in Australia, and where it says, it's $2 to $4 a kilo. If it's not $1, it's not worth it. Well, sorry, the energy equivalent in the Pilbara is $6, and that's what you're competing with. So it is already viable. That's $6 for the diesel, and that's a hedge study that I recently heard about. And so if you look at those kinds of things, it's in people's minds why you don't do that, and that comes down to being risk averse, and not wanting to change because I don't know what the risk level will be. And of course, we know mining is about as risk laden as they come.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an aerospace engineer. Aerospace is easy. It's two formulas, it's subsonic, supersonic, and the rest is math. In mining, you don't know every new meter you mine. I don't know what's coming. Well, in theory, I know. In reality, there's all these things that are thrown my way, which makes it fun as well. But that's why mining has to be risk averse to be surviving.
Yeah. But you introduced the whole idea of technology about viability versus feasibility. And back to circling back a little bit about the industry change. So if you take a look at, for example, let's take a look at a mining business, right? You do exploration and you do it by drill core. You drill 1 million kilometers or whatever of drill core, and then you look at it. There's core scanning technologies. Then you go, assume you're going underground. You do drill and blast using a jumbo that now instead of 1 drill has 8. And then you hoist everything up to the surface after you crush it, and then you process everything, even though 99% of it's waste. That model, in my opinion, that model's broken. Like, it shouldn't work. And there are probably technologies that are out, I know there are technologies out there that actually change, for example, the business of mining and the flow sheet of mining. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on this idea of, for lack of a better term, rethinking how we actually mine.
Well, there's a lot of technologies that do exist, whether it's in other industries or in research or so, that mining really hasn't explored yet. There is, everything that's moving ions today in processing is super interesting. There's so much going on. I always jokingly say I love bacteria because they rarely take vacation and they are not unionized. And so therefore have them do the work. And they basically, you feed them actually your waste product and a bit of sunshine maybe, and they will do the work for you, and they will create either tailings without the chemicals that we're grappling with, or no tailings at all. If I look, for example, at all the various plasma breaking technologies where you can, through sorting, separate the metal from the rest, and all of a sudden there is no flotation circuits and things like that. So the potential is there. The question is who's going to jump in the deep end, because mining, of course, wants to be fast followers for the most part.
Well, it's interesting you said the bio side of things, because a number of years ago there was a group we were working with. There's bacteria surrounding every mineral underground, right? It's there, right? The populations are already there, and you mentioned flotation as well. So the couple of discussions we had early on, there's actually a group in Liège doing some of this work. There's another group in Quebec doing some of this work. Is what if you engineer bacteria to do the flotation instead? So you have green flotation. you can't engineer sulfuric acid. Like, you're stuck. You can change the temperature, and that's about it. That's about all you can do, or you can change the strength. That's about it. Bacteria you can engineer to basically do the flotation, and you can engineer switches in them so that you have kill switches, or they do other things. And by the same token, with the bacteria that are underground, for example, the question I had, and the link back to other industries, and this is a really cool work done at University of Liège. Could you use bacteria for a type of ore sorting? Could you, attach, like they do in the medical space, like fluorescence technology to the bacteria? So you're actually doing ore sorting with bacteria that are naturally occurring, using technology from other industries at the mineral side. So all these sort of things exist. It comes out of other industries. Yeah, we're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Or people say, that's really cool. I got to go back to my day job. So how do we unlock this? Like, I agree, there's a lot of technology already out there. I was watching a YouTube video about ionic winds, that were done with NASA years ago. It's like, this is really cool stuff. That stuff exists everywhere. How do we unlock that? How do we unlock the creativity and get miners and mining companies to actually do something? Or is it up to other groups to do that?
Well, so many rabbit holes I could go into on why synthetic bacteria is difficult as opposed to naturally occurring, because then you can actually use them not in a lab environment, which would be a lot more controlled, and therefore actually the chance for the process window to be big enough to be successful is higher, but of course it's more costly. If I want to apply a bacteria, say, for tailings dam stabilization or for carbon capture, a whole different rabbit hole, for pelletization, those kinds of things. I mean, companies like BindX exist, and many others, and all that does exist today. The question is whether this is applicable, meaning feasibility. Check on that. Viability is the question. So is it applicable in our existing processes? Say dust control, do I do exactly the same watering, except afterwards I don't need to do it every few hours, but like just once a month and things like that. Does it have enough of a window of success? Those kinds of topics are I guess the important part then in the implementation. And once you have those boxes ticked, then only you get to say TRL 8, 9, where you can hand that over to operations, and then operational budget is of course much bigger to work with than usually the innovation and technology budgets that are reasonably quite limited and are very close to home, meaning close to continuous improvement type applications.
So I wanted to hit something, two things actually you just said: continuous improvement, and you also mentioned existing processes. And is that still part of the challenge? Like, you've been doing design thinking, co-founder or one of the people that helped create design thinking many years ago. Looking at design thinking to change the paradigm of that's our existing process, we've got to rethink the process and do something different. Continuous improvement, we have to do it, but we've got to do this. We've got to do stuff differently. So is the industry moving that way? Do you think we need to move faster? Like, I'm just kind of curious about what your thoughts are on that. Like, if we want to get to the point you talked about before, what do we got to do? It's not going to happen the way we're going right now.
That's not a technology topic, but a cultural topic. I mean, in my days at IDEO and Stanford, to be a co-inventor of design thinking is nonsense, because as far as I'm concerned, design thinking is common sense, and you cannot invent it. You have it or you don't. Yeah. And some of this is pretty obvious. Actually, design thinking historically in the 50s came out of the same department at Stanford where Maslow worked, meaning motivational pyramids. So that is the question. You need to push from the back and pull from the front. In order to make people realize that the current is getting uncomfortable, so I have a motivation to move away from that, and the future isn't daunting, scary, and expensive, but it's actually a dangling carrot that shows me that, this actually could work well. And then you dive into the cultural aspects of it. You change a company one person at a time. You need to start off on the top from the exco and work your way down and really look at what motivates which person in that organization, and not necessarily only in their remit and their corporate role, but them as an individual. What drives them? What ego problems have they had? What went wrong in their early childhood, right?
Egos don't exist.
On that level, you need to look at what would not scare people to do that step.
Yeah.
And where they would see that they for themselves don't have risk if they do this transformation. So cultural transformation is one person at a time, and then at some point you get to a pivot point. If enough people have changed, that then it's self-running. But that's many years of pushing the transformation up hills.
Yeah.
And at IDEO, I was one of the founders of the transformation practice that does exactly that. So technology roadmaps are easy, and to come up with what the future should look like. And then 90% is the hard work of convincing people that they actually have a really nice spot in that future that they should be happy with, which makes them intrinsically, internally self-motivated to go along. Yeah. One famous quote is, you can't force people to be motivated. And that's exactly what sometimes is happening today. Yeah. That you say, okay, from tomorrow, you're all going to be agile and whatever nonsense. That doesn't work. If people don't believe it themselves, and that's, again, deep inside. Yeah. Do I feel warm and fuzzy about doing this for whatever reasons? Only once I do that, then I'm willing to actually be self-motivated and have the energy to pull along as opposed to be pulled by somebody else.
Well, it's funny you said that. It's all about cultural shift. And one of my favorite leadership books I read was by Marshall Goldsmith on what got you here won't get you there. And it's all about the built-in motivations, the built-in egos, and how are you going to break those down and get people to actually understand and move up. But on that cultural side of things, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Because I've been very, very clear that what CMIC is doing, what Rethink Mining Ventures is doing, has nothing to do with technology. It's about exactly what you talked about, right? So you've been involved in CMIC, you've been involved in Rethink Mining Ventures for a while. You're on the board. You've helped us create roadmaps. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, anecdotally, one of the projects took 7 years from creation of roadmap to a demonstration. 7 years to get people to buy into it. I'm thinking, this is nuts. I remember in another lifetime, I was helping set up a software company, and with a phone call to IBM, had an investment of $12 million in 5 days. 5 days, not 7 years. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on CMIC, the Rethink Mining Ventures, the evolution of where we were, where we're going, and the role, or your thoughts on the role we play, the future role we play on this transformation of the industry.
Well, CMIC is about the ecosystem. So the topics that people or companies couldn't do themselves, by themselves. And so it started with finding common ground, right? So you were in that breakfast meeting where we had the plan that we bring together the CEOs, all very big egos for good reasons, and all have different opinions for good reasons. And now, what is the lowest common denominator that they all can agree on? And how, therefore, can we make this group say we want to come together to do something together. And we had like 2 hours to do that. And the result was, okay, we all feel like we're paying a lot of taxes and don't get much for it. And so therefore, if I remember correctly, it was like we were probably the biggest tax contributor to Canada. And in the industries that get subsidies, we're number 17. Yeah. I didn't even know there were 17 industries that are tracked separately. And with that agreement, all right, we need to have a stronger voice with the government and how we're viewed and that we are very well worth being funded. That was the starting point. Then we figured out again, design thinking, what is the customer needs? And the customer for mining is always operations. So what's operational needs in mining, in exploration, in processing, and so on. And the roadmaps were built, which I was a lot of fun building those. And then that split up into basically what now 11 sub-consortia, if you will, as it went along. Very soon, you figured out all the thinking part, and then it's the doing part. And so then CMIC changed its character basically to be an organization of implementers. And there, again, the knowledge share was very valuable so that everybody knows what pitfalls they shouldn't learn the hard way because others already had that experience before. And now we're at a point where that is sorted out. Now we know how the implementation needs to happen, but now we are at a point where we've identified a clear gap in the industry. And that is, if I'm like for seed funding, Series A and so on, there is enough money, whether it's from private or government grants or so in the mining industry, certainly in Canada. But then the mining houses only really want to take that on because that's where they have the big budget in operations. And that's the TRL 7, 8, 9, well, not even 7, 8, and 9 type projects. And before it's not at that maturity level, they would say, sorry, not for us. Go to our R&D and innovation teams, which have much, much smaller budgets. Yeah. And so basically we are left with the gap that there's somewhere between Series A, B, and C. There is, it's beyond venture capital because it's double-digit millions in terms of round funding. And it's not part of operations yet, which could invest 100 million, but then they need all boxes ticked, and then it's an operational investment on a feasibility level. And how do we fill that gap? That's missing. As a matter of fact, it's missing worldwide in the industry. All corporate VCs, the usual suspects, don't cover that scale. And therefore, a group that, again, comes together to share the cost, which was one of the initial thoughts, but also to share the cost of investment for technologies which we know the world wants because several CMIC members raised their hand and said, yep, I'd love that. Can we please have that? And once we have those technologies identified, then to fill that gap in funding is the natural extension, if you will, of a CMIC. And if I then close the loop, we should not forget that, however, it's an iterative process, meaning once we then have implemented, funded and implemented all of these, it's not over. Then we can start again with, all right, needs have changed, especially with the energy transition, ESG goals, constraints, costs rising. What's the next round of innovations that we want to look at? And at some point, it's not the cycles, but it's all in parallel, and that's kind of where we are at CMIC and Rethink Mining, to figure out what the next things are on the horizon, what needs implementation support, what needs customer feedback, and then what needs investment. And then we can enter on any of these steps into the funnel.
Yeah. And I'd another thought here too, which I'm hearing a lot, and I've analyzed this a little bit. For example, in Canada, right? In Canada, we are a federated country, and investments are typically done. Let's set up everything regionally. Let's do things in Sudbury or Rwanda or in BC or whatever. So, but if you extend that globally, we see the same thing. This regionalization, right? Let's do things in Brazil. Let's do things in Peru. Let's do things in Australia, and we'll connect all the regions independently because we're all replicating what we're doing anyway. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on this idea of regionalization. It's not a bad thing, but we still need to break that down, I believe. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Well, then we would have to open the can of worms, how politics works and how the feedback loop there works, right? Politicians in, let's assume, democracies want to be re-elected. Re-election means votes, and the vast majority of the public votes by their wallet.
Yeah.
meaning which subsidies, which taxes, and so on are good for me or not. Everything else is icing on the cake. It really comes down to how do I financially make that decision? I mean, in a dictatorship, it works differently, and in less sophisticated so-called democracies, it's also wallet, except today politicians don't give me, how should I say, immediately money, as in some so-called democracies, literally politicians go around and hand out bills. We do that a bit less overtly. There's lobbying, and there is, of course, promises of tax deductions and things like that, how it's done today. But that's the mechanisms.
Yes.
And so therefore, there is a big difference between representing your own national interests and doing good for the global industry. And I could go into the artwork of my wife that goes exactly into that. It's, say, the United Nations. Everybody pretends to be united. Reality is everybody wants to make sure their nation gets the biggest piece of the pie. So the united part isn't relevant. Yeah. And so in mining, similarly, where are the organizations that look across and don't care about this because they don't, say, only get Canadian funding, but also Australian, South African, EU, so the usual suspects. And how do we tackle that so that we are trusted to make sure that, all right, the new jobs are distributed evenly, because that's ultimately what this comes down to.
Well, and I guess my question was prefaced on the idea that mining is a global industry. They should be looking globally at solutions. And yes, they will do things in their own backyard, and understand the government side. They will do things in their own backyard in the region. They have to, good citizens, right? But if most of them have operations around the globe, and yet a lot of them are still focused on their own backyard for tech development and deployment and everything else. I was talking to the CEO of a software company many years ago. He said, I don't care where it comes from. We're going to invest in whatever is relevant for my company. So I guess my question related to the regionalization was, and this circles back a little bit now that CMIC and RMB are now operating in 4 countries, 4 continents. Is there a role for an organization that breaks down those regional barriers to get that cross-pollination? So we're not, replication is good, but you get further ahead if you're not. So I'm curious.
Well, there's certain things are given. The CEO and ExCo need to maximize shareholder return, and that has a lot to do with the taxes in the place where you're based, right? So therefore, that's a given. But other than that, every asset is different. Every infrastructure surrounding the asset is different. To run a mine in Africa and to run a mine in Canada is fundamentally different, because, for example, labor costs in Africa don't push that hard for automation, and certainly not for autonomy, because if the truck didn't have somebody on it, it would be gone next day, which is exaggerating, of course, but you know where I'm going with this. Whereas in Canada, I would on the flip side say that you do want the automation because, of course, labor costs and everything that goes around labor costs is extremely expensive, and so therefore that alone already should force me to work with people that are, say, experts in that region or so, because granted, global miners today are global. It's not like very few companies only have mines in one jurisdiction.
And that was the question I had, right? Like they are global companies, therefore doing some of this on a global basis versus just our backyard makes sense.
And quite frankly, if you look at the engineers, the technology and innovation teams around the world, they all love to work together. On a different level, on the market level in their organizations, they might be fierce competitors. But if you have them together in a room running a workshop with them, there's no way to tell that they are not from the same organization pulling in the same direction.
It's the same as using design thinking to get people to start talking about what our common goals are, how we can do that, even though they're fierce business competitors. And as you said, during one part of the conversation was the room full of CEOs, where we actually, what's the lowest hanging fruit that we have in common, right? So it all ties together. So again, Roby, thanks again. It's been great working with you for the last 10 years. Looking forward to another 10 or 20 or more, as we're all trying to dominate the world of mining innovation. It's a lot of fun, and looking forward to seeing some of this podcast material out there and getting some reaction. So thanks again, Roby.
Well, thank you, Carl. Likewise.
Thank you for tuning into Source. We hope you'll learn some valuable insights and really cool information about the mining industry, and especially how it impacts our lives every single day. You want to stay tuned to what we're up to and the really cool innovations that are going on every single day? Connect with us on our social media channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, or at our website, rethinkmining.org. Until next time, catch you later.